Hi, I'm Sean from Software for Science. Today I'm going to take a look at JQ, which is a query tool for JSON. Hopefully it will save you some time in places where you might otherwise have used CSV. So step one of this whole process is actually to have JQ installed, and as you see, I don't have it. So if I'm on an OS X, probably you already have Homebrew installed. If you don't, then that's an entirely different YouTube video, so go Google that. But when you get back here, do brew install JQ. So now we have JQ. So let's take a look at some of the interesting stuff we can do with it. So I have a data set in mind for this. I'll show you an example, what it looks like here. So let's do head record list. So somewhat inconvenient, you can see. It's just a list of objects with host, reco, and URL, and a very similar data set that works on a streaming basis instead. So you can see this is one line at a time, which is where head makes a little bit more sense. So you actually don't have to work too hard to figure out why you might want to use this. So to get started, for example, take a look at JQ dot on RecoStream, and I'll show you exactly what that does. Super simple. All it really did was format that JSON to look a little bit nicer, but dot just means to access the current object. So that's not super exciting in this stream. All it means is to concatenate the whole thing, which is not always useful, but you'll immediately see why this is an improvement. I can just give any accessor I want on top of that local object, or whatever you want to call it, and start getting objects out of each one. So it's a kind of streaming process. And there are multiple ways of actually performing this, so it's pretty intuitive, I'd say. So you can see that if it has some special characters or something in it, you can wrap it in double quotes like that. And if you wanted, you can even, say, get a specific element out of it. So let's take a look then at why we also would be interested in lists. So I'll show you, this won't work, but it'll be interesting to see anyway. So there's a failure. It's that you can't actually index that array. Remember that RecoList is actually a list of objects, whereas RecoStream is just a series of objects with new lines between them. So JQ is appropriate for both of these tasks, actually. And I'll show you for lists, this simply accesses all of the elements inside that list. The empty square brackets is kind of just magic for JQ. I guess JQ has a kind of funny query syntax, but after a few minutes, I think you'll probably get used to it. So now let's have a little bit more fun with it. You can actually create new objects in JQ. So if we just create an empty object, pass that to JQ, and then ask it to create something from nothing, you'll see this is a super simple and kind of dumb example, but you'll see how you can create something new. Okay, so there, all we did was we created a recommendation host just like right on the spot. Not really the coolest thing to do in the world, but I'll show you in just a second why that's actually kind of helpful. So instead, we may decide that we would prefer to now replace all of our recos with the same product. Another kind of dumb idea, but come on, there we go. So now let's do host here for each one, and then we'll do reco of just always the same number. So you see every host now gets the same reco. Now I made a mistake. I'll explain. So this where I did .host, that was because I was thinking of it as streaming again, but in this case I needed to iterate over the items within list. So when I did that, now you actually get a stream of host and reco where every time the reco is always 56. Okay, So all of that's kind of building up to something. Now take a look at the group by function, which you knew that SQL was going to like drag its way in here somehow. So let's group it by host, and take a look at reco list this time. And it's going to be way too much information, but just at the end, there we go, you can see that it's a list of objects, and the inner lists correspond to one host. So you can see here we have 4 copies of the same host, and there will be about 6 more. Each one of them are going to be grouped into hosts. Here is where things get much more interesting. So we can say that we want to get a iterator over all of those. I'm going to call it an iterator. I have no idea what JQ calls it. All we're really going to do with that is to unpack the outermost list. So now you see we have a list of objects rather than a list of objects. The reason for that is that we unpack that list into a stream. So the distinction hasn't been lost. They've just been unpacked into a kind of different format. Okay? This is why you would want to do that, though. You can pipe that stream into a new accessor, and that accessor can make new objects. So I'm not even sure what to call these things at this point. But one example would be, let's try to take this host, and then we will take out of each of those objects, which in this case corresponds to a list of objects, the first host, okay? And it's not going to be super interesting, but you'll get the idea. Each one of them just tells you the host that corresponds to that group. But where it gets kind of nifty is if we can say recos, we'd like to make a list, which we do by wrapping it in square brackets, one of the 47 uses of square brackets in this particular language. And we can create a new iterator over all of the entries for that particular host, and then do .reco. And so that means that we will select the reco key out of every object within the list corresponding to that host. It's much easier actually to see it than to think too hard about exactly what that query means. But now you can see how that would actually turn out to be pretty handy. But the fancier aspect to this is that we can now create nested lists inside objects, inside lists, and so on. So let's actually store all of the information so that now this one is just a reformat, and we're not actually deleting anything. So what I want to do is I want to turn each of those reco numbers into an object containing both the reco and the URL. So let's take a look and create a list that will do that for us. Now the way that we do that is by embedding another iteration and piping, and we will create a new object for every one of those stream entries. And it's simply going to be reco to .reco, and then URL to .url. Who knows, there may be an even fancier way to do that than I know even yet. But it simply will create new objects in each place where it would have only entered the reco number before. So if that's not neat enough for you, then I don't know what is, because that probably already represents at least 20 or 30 minutes that I've spent on numerous different occasions trying to just turn one JSON format into another for some data pipeline. And it's pretty neat that you can do this in just like one line.